The rain came down like Chicago had something to confess. Cold sheets of water hammered the empty streets, turning the asphalt into rivers of reflected neon. The kind of rain that made you question every decision that had led you to this exact moment in your life. Marcus Thompson gripped the steering wheel of the company Lincoln at 10:47 p.m., his knuckles aching from 12 hours behind the wheel. His eyes burned, his lower back had given up complaining 3 hours ago and settled into a dull throb that he knew would keep him awake long after he finally crawled into bed. The wipers slashed back and forth across the windshield, fighting a losing battle against the deluge, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he was calculating 47 minutes to get home, maybe 8 minutes to carry Serena up to the apartment without waking her 6 hours of sleep, if he was lucky before the 5 a.m. alarm dragged him back into consciousness. On the passenger seat, his daughter slept with the absolute trust that only children possess. 7 years old, small for her age, her curly hair pressed against the window in a way that would leave marks on her cheek. Her fingers, even in sleep, clutched the faded blue scarf draped across her chest. The fabric was worn thin in places, the color long since surrendered to countless washes. But Serena never let it go. Not since the morning 3 years ago when Marcus had to explain why mommy wasn't coming home. The scarf still carried the faintest trace of lavender, Denise's scent. Some nights when Serena was asleep and the apartment was too quiet, Marcus would catch a whisper of it and feel his chest cave in all over again. He had been driving when they called him. Not this car, not this route, but driving nonetheless, ferrying some executive whose name he couldn't remember to some meeting that meant nothing. His phone had buzzed with an unknown number, and he almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail, almost continued his shift like any other Tuesday night. But he answered, and the voice on the other end, clinical and careful, explained that there had been an accident. A drunk driver running a red light on Michigan Avenue. Impact on the driver's side. They were sorry. They were so sorry. Marcus had pulled the car over. He remembered that much. Remembered his phone slipping from his fingers. Remembered his knees hitting the floor of the break room at the Sterling Court garage, though he had no memory of getting there. Remembered the sound that came out of his mouth, something between a howl and a prayer, the kind of noise a man makes when the universe reaches into his chest and tears out everything that matters. 3 years, 1,096 days. And still sometimes he woke up reaching for her side of the bed. The guilt never left. If he had been home that night instead of driving some stranger across the city, maybe he would have driven Denise to her sister's house instead. Maybe he would have taken a different route. Maybe he would have been the one to catch that red light and she would be alive. And Serena would still have a mother and none of this would be happening. But maybes didn't raise a child. Maybes didn't pay rent. Maybes didn't put food on the table or keep the lights on or buy new shoes when small feet outgrew old ones faster than the budget could accommodate. So Marcus buried his grief in motion. He worked. He drove. He showed up for every shift, took every overtime opportunity, said yes to every last-minute request. And when the daycare closed at 6 and there was no one else to watch Serena, he brought her along. She learned to sleep in passenger seats the way other children learn to sleep in their beds. She learned that her father's world was measured in miles and hours in the steady hum of an engine. She learned without anyone teaching her that some kinds of love look like showing up even when you're exhausted, even when you're broken, even when every cell in your body wants to give up. Tonight had been longer than usual. A last-minute delivery across town to the Ritz-Carlton, then 2 hours waiting in the parking garage for a client who never showed. The dispatcher's voice crackling through the radio with another assignment. Then another. Then another. By the time Marcus finally clocked out at 10:30, his vision was starting to blur at the edges. All he wanted was to get Serena home, tuck her into bed, maybe catch 4 hours of sleep before doing it all over again. And then he saw her. At first, his brain didn't register what his eyes were showing him. A figure on the sidewalk moving slowly through the rain. No umbrella, no coat. Just a woman walking alone, her shoulders hunched against the downpour, her steps unsteady on the wet concrete. Marcus kept driving, none of his business. Probably someone who got caught in the storm looking for shelter, waiting for a rideshare. The city was full of people making bad decisions on bad nights. But something made him look again. The woman wasn't hurrying, wasn't looking for cover. She walked like someone who had already given up on finding it, like someone who had nowhere to go and no reason to get there. Her designer blouse was plastered to her skin. Her feet were bare, her heels abandoned somewhere behind her, forgotten or discarded. Her blonde hair hung in wet ropes around her face. And Marcus recognized her, Ella Carter, CEO of Sterling Corp., the woman whose signature was on his paychecks. The woman who swept through the lobby every morning with her security team, who delivered quarterly addresses with a precision that made grown men sweat, who had built a $2.3 billion empire through sheer force of will and an apparent immunity to human emotion. The Ice Queen, the drivers called her. Never a smile, never a thank you, never a glance at the people who held doors and drove cars and cleaned offices. She existed on a plane above the rest of them, and that plane did not include acknowledging the existence of people like Marcus Thompson. But the woman on that sidewalk looked nothing like Ella Carter. This woman looked like she was dissolving, like the rain was washing away whatever held her together, and soon there would be nothing left but expensive fabric and empty space. Marcus's foot pressed the accelerator. The car moved forward. Distance grew between him and whatever he had just witnessed. Not his problem, not his business, not his place. She was a CEO. She had resources, connections, an entire corporation of people paid to solve her problems. If she wanted help, she could call someone, her driver, her assistant, her security team, anyone. Who was he to interfere? Nobody. A black man in a company car approaching a white female executive alone at night. He could already see the headlines if something went wrong. The suspicious looks, the questions, the assumption of guilt that would follow him like a shadow. He thought about Serena, about the rent due next week, $847, that he had exactly $912 to cover. About the parent-teacher conference on Thursday that he couldn't afford to miss, not after missing the last two. About the dental appointment next month that would cost more than he had saved. No, this wasn't his fight. This wasn't his story. But the car kept moving, and Marcus's eyes kept drifting to the rearview mirror, and the woman's figure grew smaller, swallowed by the rain and the darkness, and something in his chest began to tighten. He looked at Serena. She was still asleep, her face peaceful, her small hand wrapped around Denise's scarf like it was the only anchor in a stormy sea. In the dim light from the dashboard, she looked so much like her mother that Marcus felt his breath catch. The same cheekbones, the same way her brow furrowed slightly when she dreamed, the same stubborn curl of hair that refused to stay behind her ear. A thought crept into his mind, unbidden and unwelcome. Ella Carter was somebody's daughter too. Maybe her parents were still alive. Maybe they weren't. But somewhere at some point, someone had held her the way Marcus held Serena. Someone had loved her before the world turned her into a title, a position, a name that people whispered with fear and resentment. Someone had watched her sleep and marveled at the miracle of her existence. And tonight that someone's daughter was walking alone in the rain, looking like she was about to fall apart. Marcus thought about Denise, about the night she died, about how she had been alone on that road when the drunk driver came barreling through the intersection, about the seconds between impact and darkness, and whether she had been scared and whether she had wished for someone to stop. What if someone had seen her? What if someone had been paying attention? What if someone had chosen to act instead of assuming it wasn't their problem? The what-ifs didn't bring Denise back. Nothing would bring Denise back. But they haunted him nonetheless, and tonight, watching that figure disappear into the rain, they rose up with a fury he couldn't ignore. His father had taught him something years ago in a different city and a different life. A lesson delivered not in words but in actions, in the way the old man stopped to help strangers change tires on the highway, in the way he gave up his seat on the bus, in the way he treated every person he met as if they mattered. A real man doesn't walk past someone who needs help. Doesn't matter who they are. Marcus looked at Serena one more time. Then he turned the car around. The rain seemed to intensify as he drove back, hammering the roof with renewed fury, as if the storm itself was trying to talk him out of what he was about to do. His heart pounded against his ribs. His hands were slick on the steering wheel. This was stupid. This was reckless. This was the kind of decision that could cost him everything. But he kept driving anyway. He found her 2 blocks back, standing motionless on the sidewalk. She had stopped walking. Her head was bowed, her body swaying slightly like a tree that had given up fighting the wind and was simply waiting to fall. Marcus pulled the car to the curb. The passenger window was on the wrong side, so he reached across and rolled down the rear window. Rain immediately splattered the leather seats. He didn't care. Ms. Carter. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by exhaustion, and something else he couldn't name. He cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, I'm Marcus Thompson. I work in transportation for Sterling. Can I give you a ride somewhere? For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain fell, the wipers slashed. Serena mumbled something in her sleep, a fragment of a dream escaping her lips. Then slowly, Ella Carter lifted her head. Her eyes met his through the rain, and Marcus saw something there that made his breath catch in his throat. Not the cold calculation he had expected, not the imperious dismissal he had prepared himself for. Emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes when everything that made you who you are has been scraped away, and there's nothing left but a shell going through the motions. I don't need help. Her voice was flat, automatic, like she had said those words so many times they had lost all meaning. She turned and started walking again. Marcus should have driven away. She had refused. He had done his part. He had made the offer she had declined, and now he could return to his life with a clear conscience. But conscience, he was learning, was not so easily satisfied. He put the car in drive and followed slowly, keeping pace with her, the engine humming softly through the rain. He didn't say anything else. Didn't try to convince her, just stayed there, a quiet presence in the storm, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. The seconds stretched into minutes. The rain continued its assault. Ella kept walking, and Marcus kept following, and somewhere in the backseat of his mind, a voice was screaming about all the ways this could go wrong. But then she stopped. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, and finally looked back at the car. Her eyes moved from Marcus in the driver's seat to the passenger side, where Serena slept peacefully, the faded blue scarf pressed against her cheek. Something shifted in Ella's expression. The walls didn't come down, but they cracked just slightly, in a way that only someone paying close attention would notice. Without a word, she walked to the car and opened the back door. She got in. Marcus' heart still pounding, pulled away from the curb and drove into the night. The silence inside the car was thick enough to suffocate. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of every small movement from the back seat. The rain continued to hammer the windshield. The wipers squeaked in a steady rhythm that only made the quiet more unbearable. Ella sat as far from him as the back seat allowed, pressed against the door like she was ready to bolt at any moment. Her wet clothes dripped onto the leather. She made no move to apologize, no effort to acknowledge the mess she was making. She just stared out the window, her reflection a ghost in the rain-streaked glass. Where to? Marcus kept his voice neutral, professional, as if this was just another fare, just another passenger, just another night. She didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice had been stripped of the commanding tone he remembered from the quarterly meetings he sometimes glimpsed through open doors. The Meridian Hotel, downtown. Marcus adjusted the route. The Meridian, one of the most expensive hotels in the city, the kind of place where a single night's stay cost more than his monthly rent. The kind of place that existed in a different universe than the one he inhabited. He didn't ask questions. It wasn't his place. But the drive was long and the silence was heavy, and somewhere in that heaviness, something began to shift. Serena stirred in her sleep. Her small body adjusted, seeking comfort, and in the movement, the scarf slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor of the car. Marcus saw it happen in his peripheral vision. He started to reach for it, but Ella moved first. She leaned forward, her wet hair dripping, and picked up the scarf from the floor. She held it for a moment, her thumb brushing against the worn fabric, tracing the faded pattern. In the dim light from passing street lamps, Marcus watched her face change. Something moved behind her eyes. Something painful. Something old. Then gently she placed the scarf back in Serena's hands. The little girl sighed in her sleep and pulled it closer, her fingers tightening around the familiar fabric. Neither adult said a word, but the silence after that moment felt different. Less cold, more human. When they arrived at the Meridian, Marcus pulled up to the entrance. A doorman in a pristine uniform immediately stepped forward with an umbrella ready to escort the guest inside. But Ella didn't move to open the door. She was still looking at Serena. Her mother's the question came out soft, almost reluctant, like she hadn't meant to ask it. Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. 3 years of practice had taught him how to talk about Denise without falling apart. The words came out simple, clinical, a statement of fact, rather than a wound still bleeding. Yes. My wife. She passed away 3 years ago. Serena hasn't let go of it since. He didn't elaborate, never did. Not with strangers. But Ella Carter, he was beginning to realize, was not the person he had thought she was. She's lucky. Ella's voice dropped lower, and Marcus had to strain to hear the words over the rain. To have something to hold on to. I don't have anything left of my mother. She died when I was 10. My father buried himself in work after that. Board meetings, business trips, anything to avoid being home. I raised myself. The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected and raw. Marcus didn't know what to say. He hadn't anticipated this, hadn't expected the most powerful woman at Sterling Corp to reveal something so personal to a driver she barely knew. Before he could respond, Ella opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. She stepped out, then turned back one last time. Thank you, Marcus. It was the first time she had used his name. Not Mr. Thompson, not driver, Marcus. Then she was gone, disappearing through the golden doors of the hotel, and Marcus was left alone with his sleeping daughter and the echo of her words. He would learn later what had happened that day. The divorce papers she had signed that afternoon, ending an 8-year marriage to a man who had been sleeping with her assistant for the last 2. The moment she had walked out of the lawyer's office on North LaSalle Street and kept walking, not knowing where she was going, not caring about the rain. But that night, all Marcus knew was that something had shifted. Something small, almost imperceptible, but real. He drove home thinking it was over, a strange encounter, a moment of unexpected humanity, and then back to normal. Their worlds were too different. She would forget his name by morning, and he would go back to being invisible. But life, Marcus was learning, rarely cooperated with expectations. 1 week later, the call came. Marcus was in the garage running through his pre-shift checklist. Oil level, tire pressure, fluid reservoirs. The kind of routine that his hands could perform without his brain's involvement. Muscle memory built over 4 years of showing up and doing the job. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah Chen, executive assistant to Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Carter has requested you specifically for a 3-day business trip to Philadelphia beginning Monday. Standard per diem rates apply, plus a $200 daily bonus. Can you confirm availability? Marcus almost said no, almost made up an excuse about scheduling conflicts or family obligations. Almost retreated into the safe anonymity of being just another driver. But $200 a day for 3 days was $600. Enough to cover Serena's upcoming dental appointment with money to spare. He confirmed availability. Derek Williams found him 10 minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in hand and curiosity written all over his face. Derek was 47, loud, perpetually cheerful, and constitutionally incapable of minding his own business. He had been at Sterling for 15 years and knew everyone's secrets, which he shared freely and without malice. He was also the closest thing Marcus had to a friend in the company, though Marcus would never have admitted it out loud. So, Derek leaned against the Lincoln, handing over one of the coffees. Word is you're driving the Ice Queen to Philly. Marcus took the coffee. Accepted the assignment, yeah. Derek's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. You know, she hasn't requested a specific driver in 10 years. Uses the rotation like everyone else. And suddenly she wants you. I was professional, didn't ask questions. She probably had appreciated that. Uh-huh. Derek's tone made clear he wasn't buying it. And the part where you picked her up off the street at 11 at night, Marcus's hand tightened on the coffee cup. How did you know about that security at the Meridian? Guy owes me $20 from the Bears game. He mentioned a Sterling car dropping off a soaking wet woman who matched Carter's description. It wasn't like that. I'm not saying it was like anything. I'm saying that woman hasn't shown a human emotion in a decade and suddenly she's requesting the driver who saw her at her worst. That's interesting. Marcus shook his head. It's a job, Derek, that's all. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Something had happened in that car. Some wall had cracked, some barrier had lowered. And despite every instinct telling him to stay in his lane to maintain the professional distance that kept people like him safe from people like her, Marcus found himself curious about who Ella Carter really was underneath all that ice. The Philadelphia trip began on a gray Monday morning, the kind of day that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just threaten. Marcus arrived at the Sterling parking garage at 5 a.m. 3 hours before pickup. He checked the car twice, made sure the interior was spotless, The temperature controls were functioning, the phone chargers were working. Small details that most passengers never noticed, but that separated good drivers from forgettable ones. Ella emerged from the building at exactly 8 o'clock, flanked by Sarah Chen and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly salary. She wore a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face arranged into the expressionless mask that Marcus now recognized as armor. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Mr. Thompson. No warmth, no acknowledgement of what had passed between them a week ago. Just a name and a tone that established clearly and immediately the parameters of their relationship. Marcus opened the door for her. She got in, he got in, they drove. For the first 2 hours, Ella worked. Laptop open, phone ringing, constantly voice sharp as she handled crisis after crisis with the efficiency of someone who had been putting out fires her entire life. Marcus drove and listened and said nothing, a ghost at the wheel. But somewhere around the Pennsylvania border, the call stopped. The laptop closed. And Ella Carter, for the first time since Marcus had known of her existence, sat in silence and stared out the window. The landscape rolled by. Highways gave way to smaller roads. The gray sky began to break, letting through occasional shafts of pale sunlight. "Your daughter." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, surprised. She was looking at him. "Serena. How old is she? 7. Second grade. Does she like school most days? She's not a fan of math, but she loves reading. Goes through books faster than I can buy them." Something flickered across Ella's face. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. "I was the same way. My mother used to take me to the library every Saturday. I would check out the maximum number of books allowed and finish them all before the next weekend." It was the second time she had mentioned her mother. Marcus filed it away, sensing the significance, but didn't push. Serena would probably love that. "The library near us closed down last year. Budget cuts. Now we have to drive 30 minutes to the nearest one." Ella's brow furrowed slightly, the expression of someone making a mental note cataloging information for later use. That evening, stuck in traffic after a dinner meeting that had run long, Ella closed her laptop again. The city lights of Philadelphia blurred through rain-spotted windows, and for a moment she looked almost peaceful. Then she started talking. About her ex-husband, about the affair, about the 2 years everyone knew except her, or maybe she knew and didn't want to see. About signing the divorce papers in that cold office on LaSalle Street, feeling nothing at all. He said, "I love Sterling more than I loved him." Maybe he was right. Maybe I don't know how to love anything else. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like she was reading a quarterly report rather than confessing the wreckage of her personal life. Marcus listened. He didn't offer advice or platitudes. Didn't try to fill the silence with empty comfort. Just listened the way he wished someone had listened to him in those first terrible months after Denise. And in that listening, something began to build between them. Not friendship exactly, not romance, something harder to name. A recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement that grief took different forms, but spoke the same language. When they returned to Chicago 3 days later, Marcus assumed that would be the end of it. A strange interlude in 2 very different lives. But the calls kept coming. Late-night drives when Ella needed to clear her head. Airport pickups when she didn't want to deal with the regular car service. Sometimes she worked in the back seat. Sometimes she just watched the city pass by. And sometimes, more often, as the weeks went on, she talked. Marcus learned that she had been CEO for 10 years. That she had clawed her way up in an industry dominated by men who underestimated her at every turn. That she had sacrificed everything for Sterling Corp. Everything, including it, turned out a marriage that ended in betrayal and an empty penthouse that never felt like home. He learned that she hadn't cried since she was 10 years old. That her father had taught her tears were weakness, and she had believed him. That she had built herself into something hard and cold and unbreakable, and now she wasn't sure there was anything soft left underneath. And Ella, in turn, learned about Marcus. About the engineering degree from the University of Michigan. About the 8 years at Ford designing hybrid transmission systems, 2 patents with his name on them. About the way his career had ended, not with a bang, but with a choice because Denise was gone, and Serena needed him, and no company was willing to let him work the flexible hours that single fatherhood demanded. "You gave up your career for her." Ella's voice held something Marcus couldn't identify. Wonder, maybe, or disbelief. "I chose my daughter over my career. There's a difference." And what's the difference? Marcus considered the question. Giving up means losing something against your will. Choosing means deciding what matters most. I didn't lose anything, I just rearranged my priorities. Ella was quiet for a long moment. I don't think I've ever chosen anything that wasn't about the company. Maybe it's not too late. She didn't respond. But Marcus saw her turn toward the window, saw her reflection staring back at him with an expression that might in someone else have been hope. The evening everything changed began with a canceled babysitter. Marcus had arranged for Mrs. Patterson from 4B to watch Serena while he drove Ella to a charity gala downtown. But Mrs. Patterson called at 6:15 with a stomach bug, and by 6:30 Marcus had exhausted every backup option he had, which left him with two choices: cancel on Ella or bring Serena along. He thought about calling to explain. But the gala was important, something about a children's hospital foundation that Ella actually seemed to care about, and Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave her stranded. So Serena came. She sat in the passenger seat with strict instructions to be quiet, be polite, and absolutely do not ask any weird questions. She promised. She even managed to look serious about it for almost 30 seconds before the gap-toothed grin broke through. When Ella opened the back door and saw the small girl in the front seat, she stopped. Marcus's apology tumbled out before he could organize it. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. The babysitter canceled last minute and I couldn't find anyone else. And I know this is unprofessional, but it's fine." 2 words. But the way she said them, the way her eyes stayed on Serena told Marcus something had shifted. Ella got in. The car pulled away from the curb. For the first few minutes, Serena tried to follow instructions. She really did. But 7-year-olds are not known for their restraint, and this 7-year-old had inherited her mother's curiosity and her father's inability to leave well enough alone. "Are you my daddy's boss?" The question came out before Marcus could stop it. Ella's lips twitched, something like a smile quickly suppressed. "Something like that." Serena considered this. "You look tired. My daddy looks tired too. He works too much." Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. "Serena, that's not polite." But Ella shook her head. "No, she's right. I am tired." She looked at Serena with what might have been genuine curiosity. "What do you do when your daddy is tired?" Serena thought about it with the seriousness that children bring to important questions. "I make him tea, and I let him pick the movie even if it's boring." Something softened in Ella's expression. Something old and guarded and carefully hidden began to peek through the cracks. She reached into her bag and pulled out a book. A children's picture book with a colorful cover, the kind sold at airport gift shops. Marcus recognized it. He had seen her buy it 2 weeks ago at O'Hare, watched her stare at it for a long moment, before tucking it into her bag without explanation. "I bought this earlier today. I don't know why. I don't have anyone to give it to." She held it out to Serena. "Would you like it?" Serena's eyes went wide. She looked at Marcus for permission. He nodded, too surprised to speak. She took the book with both hands like it was made of gold. "Thank you." A pause. And then, because she was 7 and had no filter, "Do you have kids?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ella's smile faded. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Marcus watched her in the mirror, saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her hands folded in her lap. "No, I don't." Serena nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "That's okay. My daddy says family is the people who love you, not just the people who look like you." Marcus felt his throat constrict. He didn't remember saying that. It was something Denise used to tell Serena back when she was alive, back when their little family was whole. The fact that Serena still remembered, still repeated it, made his chest ache in ways he couldn't articulate. In the rearview mirror, he saw Ella turn toward the window. He could have sworn he saw her wipe her eyes. The drive continued in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Warmer, more fragile, like something new had been born in the space between them, something that none of them quite knew how to name. When they reached the gala, Ella stepped out of the car, then turned back one last time. "She's a remarkable child." Marcus nodded. "I know." Ella's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. "You're lucky." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of evening gowns and tuxedos, and Marcus was left with his daughter and a feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. The feeling terrified him. That night, after Serena was asleep with her new book clutched against her chest alongside Denise's scarf, Marcus sat by the window of their small apartment and stared at the city lights. He thought about Denise, about the way she laughed, about the way she used to tease him for being too serious, about the way she made everything, even the hard things, feel possible. He thought about the 3 years since her death, 3 years of putting one foot in front of the other, 3 years of being strong for Serena, 3 years of refusing to feel anything beyond the daily grind of survival. And he thought about Ella, about the way she looked at Serena, about the rare smiles, about the fragments of herself she had shared with him, pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to assemble. Something was building between them. He could feel it, and the feeling terrified him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Denise had been gone for 3 years, but some nights it felt like 3 days. The wound was still fresh, still raw, still capable of bleeding at the slightest touch. How could he let himself care about someone else? How could he even think about it? It felt like betrayal, like he was erasing Denise's memory, replacing her with someone new. Like the love they had shared was something that could be discarded and replaced a worn-out part in a machine. And beyond the guilt, there was fear. Fear that if he let himself hope again, he would lose again. Fear that the universe, having taken Denise, would take away anyone else he dared to love. So he told himself it was nothing, a strange intersection of two lonely lives that would eventually diverge. A temporary anomaly in the normal order of things. He told himself to stay professional, stay distant, stay safe. But even as he made these resolutions, he knew they were lies. Because when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Denise anymore. He saw Ella, and that scared him more than anything. The morning after the gala, Marcus found the drawing. Serena had been working on something for days, hiding it under her pillow, refusing to let him see. He assumed it was a school project, something for art class, nothing important. But that morning, rushing to get her ready for school, he found it on the kitchen table. She must have left it there by accident, or maybe she wanted him to find it. With Serena, it was hard to tell. It was a family portrait drawn in crayon on construction paper. 3 figures stood in front of a house. Marcus, tall and brown-skinned, with a smile that Serena had drawn too wide, giving him a slightly manic expression. Serena, small and curly-haired, standing between 2 adults. And next to them, holding Serena's hand, a woman with yellow hair and a blue dress. Underneath, in Serena's careful handwriting, "My family, Daddy, me, and Miss Ella." Marcus stared at the drawing for a very long time. His daughter had included Ella in their family. He didn't know whether to feel touched or terrified. The answer when it came was both. That afternoon, everything fell apart. Marcus was in the break room when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something about the timing made his stomach clench. Marcus, Ella's voice, but different, cold, distant. The voice of a CEO, not the voice of the woman who had laughed at Serena's questions. "I wanted to let you know that I'll be using the regular car service from now on. Your work has been excellent. I'll make sure to note that in your file." The words hit like a physical blow. Did I do something wrong? Oh, no, you've been nothing but professional. This is just, it's better this way, for both of us. The line went dead. Marcus sat in the break room, staring at his phone, trying to understand what had just happened. Everything had seemed fine, more than fine. She had been warming up, opening up, letting him see behind the mask. Serena had made her laugh. She had given his daughter a book, for God's sake. And now, without warning, without explanation, she had cut him off. He didn't know that earlier that day Ella had seen the drawing. She had been walking through the transportation wing on her way to the parking garage, a route she had started taking recently, though she would never have admitted why. Serena had been there waiting for Marcus to finish his shift. The little girl had spotted her and run over proudly, holding up her artwork. "Look, Miss Ella, I drew my family." Ella had taken the drawing, had looked at the 3 figures standing in front of the house, had read the words underneath, "Daddy, me, and Miss Ella." She had smiled, had told Serena it was beautiful, had thanked her for including her, and then she had gone back to her office and felt the walls closing in, because the drawing forced her to confront something she had been avoiding for weeks. This wasn't just a professional arrangement anymore. This wasn't just a driver and a passenger, an employee and an employer, 2 people sharing space in a car. Serena was putting her in the place of her mother, in the place of Denise. And Ella Carter didn't do family. Her mother had died when she was 10. Her father had abandoned her emotionally, if not physically. Her marriage had crumbled because she didn't know how to let anyone in. She was broken. She was incapable of the kind of love that Marcus and Serena needed. And if she stayed in their lives, she would only hurt them. So she did what she had always done. She ran. The days after the call blurred together. Marcus went back to regular shifts, regular routes, regular life. He told himself it was for the best. She was a CEO. He was a driver. Whatever had been building between them was a fantasy, nothing more. But at night when the apartment was quiet and Serena was asleep, he would sit by the window and stare at the city lights, feeling emptier than he had in years. Derek noticed. Of course Derek noticed. Derek noticed everything. "You okay, man?" They were in the garage end of shift, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Marcus shrugged. "Fine. You've been fine for 2 weeks now. That's a long time to be fine." "I said I'm fine, Derek." Derek studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You know what I think? I think you're scared. Not of her, not of the Rome. You're scared of actually feeling something again." Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because Derek was right. Every night he thought about Ella, about the way she looked at Serena, about the rare smiles, about the fragments of herself she had shared with him. And every night the guilt rose up like bile in his throat. Denise had been gone for 3 years, but some nights it felt like hours. How could he let himself care about someone else? How could he even think about it? It felt like betrayal, like he was erasing her memory, replacing her with someone new. And the fear that if he let himself hope, he would lose again, that the universe would take away anyone he dared to love. So he kept his distance, stayed professional, told himself that whatever connection existed between him and Ella was temporary, a strange intersection of two lonely lives that would eventually diverge. But then he saw the scarf. It was morning a week after Ella's call. Marcus was getting Serena ready for school, going through the usual routine of cereal and teeth brushing and finding matching socks. He went to make her bed and stopped. The blue scarf, Denise's scarf, the scarf that Serena had slept with every night for 3 years, was gone. He searched the bed, under the pillow, between the sheets. Nothing. Panic rising in his chest, he tore through her room, under the dresser, behind the bookshelf, in the closet. He found it at the very back, stuffed behind a pile of old toys. Hidden. Serena. He found her in the kitchen, pushing cereal around her bowl without eating. "Why did you hide Mommy's scarf?" She didn't look up. Her voice was small. "I don't want it anymore." "What?" "Sweetheart, you love that scarf. You've slept with it every night since. I don't want to remember anymore." Her voice cracked, and when she finally raised her eyes, they were filled with tears. "Every time I hold it, you get sad. Every time I talk about Mommy, you look like you're going to cry. I don't want to make you sad anymore, Daddy." Marcus felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. He knelt down beside her, pulling her into his arms. She was so small, so fragile, carrying a weight that no 7-year-old should ever have to bear. "Serena, no, you don't make me sad. I just miss Mommy, that's all." "But you never smile anymore," she whispered into his shoulder. "You used to smile. Before. When Miss Ella was around, you smiled more." The words hit like a punch to the chest. For 3 years, Marcus had tried to protect Serena from his grief. 3 years of holding everything in, of being strong, of never letting her see him break. And all this time she had been watching, learning, believing that love meant suffering, that happiness was something to feel guilty about. He had taught his daughter that joy was a betrayal. And in that moment, kneeling on the kitchen floor with Serena crying in his arms, Marcus Thompson finally understood what he had been doing to them both. He had been so afraid of letting Denise go that he had forgotten how to live. He had been so focused on honoring her memory that he had stopped making new memories. He had built a shrine out of grief and called it love. But love, real love, the kind Denise had shown him every day of their marriage, wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about having the courage to face the future, even when it was terrifying, even when it meant risking everything, even when it meant opening your heart to someone new. That night after Serena was asleep, Marcus sat alone in the darkness of their apartment and made a decision. He didn't know what would come of it, didn't know if Ella would even listen, didn't know if the walls she had built were too high to climb. But he knew he had to try. For himself, for Serena, and maybe, just maybe, for Ella too. Because some doors once closed needed someone brave enough to knock again. And Marcus Thompson, against all odds, was ready to be brave. The cemetery gates stood open at 11:43 wrought iron sentinels that had witnessed 1,000 goodbyes and would witness 1,000 more. Marcus pulled his car to the curb outside Oak Hill Memorial Park and sat for a long moment, engine idling, hands gripping the wheel like it might anchor him to some version of himself that still made sense. He had not been here since the funeral. 1,096 days. He had counted them once in a moment of masochistic arithmetic and then wished he hadn't. The night air hit him when he stepped out cold for October, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant rain. The grounds were empty, as he knew they would be. Who visited the dead at midnight? Only the desperate, only the lost, only those who had run out of places to hide from the conversations they needed to have. Marcus walked between the headstones, following a path his feet remembered even when his conscious mind refused to. Past the marble angels and granite crosses. Past the veterans section with its small American flags. Past the infant graves that always made his chest tighten because those parents had it worse than him. They had it worse, and yet here he was still drowning in his own grief like it was the only grief that mattered. Denise's grave was in the eastern section beneath a maple tree that would be beautiful in daylight. Now it was just a shadow branches reaching toward a clouded sky like fingers grasping for something they would never hold. The headstone was simple, gray marble. Her name, her dates, 3 words carved beneath beloved wife and mother. Marcus stood before it, hands in his pockets, and realized he had no idea what to say. So he started with the truth. I haven't been here. Not once. 3 years and I couldn't make myself come. His voice sounded strange in the silence, too loud and too small at the same time. I told myself I was too busy, too tired, too practical for sentimental gestures. But you always knew when I was lying, didn't you? The wind stirred the leaves above him, and for a moment Marcus could almost hear her laugh. That knowing laugh she used when he was being ridiculous, and she was too kind to say so directly. The truth is, I was scared. Scared that standing here would make it real in a way I couldn't handle. Scared that if I stopped moving long enough to feel it, the feeling would swallow me whole. He crouched down, his fingers brushing the cold stone. So I kept running, working, driving, taking every shift, every assignment, every excuse not to be alone with my own head. I thought if I stayed busy enough, the grief would get tired and go away. A bitter laugh escaped him. Turns out grief doesn't work like that. Turns out it just waits, patient, ready to ambush you at 2 in the morning when you're too tired to fight back. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the night sounds. A distant car, an owl somewhere in the trees, the rustle of wind through grass that grew over the places where people used to be. I've been trying to keep you alive, Denise, in my head, in my heart. I've been holding on so tight that I didn't notice what it was doing to Serena. His voice cracked on his daughter's name. She hid your scarf. Did you know that the scarf you wore every winter, the one that still smells like you if you breathe in deep enough? She hid it because she thought it made me sad. She thought that loving you, remembering you, was hurting me. Tears he hadn't felt coming were suddenly there, hot on his cheeks. She's 7 years old, and she's already learned that happiness is something to feel guilty about. That love leads to loss. That opening your heart only gets it broken. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I taught her that. Me. By being so afraid to let you go that I forgot how to hold on to anything else. The maple leaves rustled again, and Marcus looked up at the sky. The clouds were moving fast, revealing and concealing stars in an endless dance of light and shadow. There's someone, Denise, a woman. She's complicated and difficult, and she's built walls so high I can barely see over them. But when she laughs, when she really laughs, it's like watching someone come back to life. He paused, struggling with the words. I started feeling something, and I got scared. Scared of betraying you, scared of replacing you. Like loving someone new meant loving you less. His hand pressed flat against the headstone. But that's not how it works, is it? Love isn't a finite resource. You told me that once, back when I was jealous of how much time you spent with your sister. Remember, you said love expands. It doesn't divide. The memory surfaced sharp and clear. Denise in their tiny first apartment, laughing at his sulking, pulling him close. I've been keeping you alive by killing myself, by refusing to feel anything except the grief. And I've been teaching our daughter that this is what love looks like. Marcus stood up, his knees aching from the cold ground. That's not what you would have wanted. You would have told me to stop being an idiot. You would have kicked me in the shin and told me to go live my life. He almost smiled. You were never very patient with self-pity. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere distant. I'm not gonna stop loving you, Denise. Not ever. You're part of me. Part of Serena. Part of everything good in my life. His voice steadied. But I think it's time I started living again. Not just surviving. Not just getting through each day until the next one. Actually living. He touched the headstone one last time. For me, and for Serena, and for whoever else I might be brave enough to let in. The clouds parted just for a moment, and moonlight spilled across the cemetery like a benediction. And Marcus Thompson, standing alone among the dead, felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years: permission. He drove home through empty streets, the city quiet in that particular way it only got between midnight and dawn. His mind was calm for the first time in weeks, clear in a way that felt almost unsettling after so long in the fog. He knew what he needed to do. When he got home, he checked on Serena. She was asleep, curled around a pillow, her face peaceful in the nightlight's glow. The blue scarf was back on her bed. He had put it there that morning, but she wasn't holding it. Progress, maybe. Or just change. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out a legal pad and a pen, and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster, then in a rush that he couldn't have stopped if he wanted to. Everything he had been afraid to say, everything he had been afraid to feel, everything that had been building inside him for weeks, months, maybe years. He wrote about Denise, about Serena, about the accident and the grief and the endless gray days that followed. He wrote about driving Ella home that rainy night, about the way she looked when she thought no one was watching, about the walls she built, and the glimpses he had caught of what lay behind them. He wrote about fear, about hope, about the terrifying possibility that he might actually be ready to feel something again. And when he was done, when the sun was starting to lighten the sky outside his window, he folded the pages into an envelope and wrote her name on the front. Ella. No title, no formality. Just her name, because that was who he was writing to. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, the woman underneath, the one who had lost her mother at 10 and never learned how to stop protecting herself from the pain. He dropped the letter at Sterling Corp's front desk on his way to his shift, with instructions to deliver it to Miss Carter's office. The receptionist gave him a strange look but took it without comment. Then Marcus clocked in and went to work, because that was what you did. You kept moving, you kept showing up, you let the universe sort out the rest. The hours passed in a blur of traffic and radio chatter and the familiar rhythm of the job. Marcus picked up executives and dropped them off. He navigated construction zones and accident scenes. He answered dispatch calls and filled out mileage reports. And underneath it all, a current of something that felt almost like anticipation. He had done what he could, said what he needed to say. The rest was up to her. 3 days passed, no response. Marcus told himself it didn't matter. Told himself he hadn't expected anything. Told himself that the letter had been for him a way of closing a chapter, and whether Ella read it or burned it or threw it in the trash was irrelevant. He almost believed it. On the 4th day, Derek found him in the garage. You look like hell. Thanks. Very supportive. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept? Marcus shrugged. I sleep. You lie awake and stare at the ceiling. That's not the same thing. How would you know what I do at night? Derek grinned. I know everything, remember. Also, you've got circles under your eyes that could carry luggage. Marcus didn't have the energy to argue. He leaned against the Lincoln, feeling the cool metal through his jacket. I wrote her a letter. Derek's eyebrows shot up. The Ice Queen? Don't call her that. Sorry. Ms. Carter. You wrote her a letter. Yeah, like a love letter. Like a letter. Just saying things that needed to be said. Derek was quiet for a moment. Rare for him. And nothing. It's been 4 days. No response. Derek nodded slowly. You know, there's a possibility that she just needs time to process. Not everyone responds to emotional declarations in 48 hours. I know, and there's also a possibility that she's scared. People who build walls that high don't usually tear them down overnight. I know that too. Derek clapped him on the shoulder. Then give it time, man. You did your part. Now let her do hers. Marcus wanted to believe it was that simple, but hope was a dangerous thing, and he had already given it more room than was wise. That night he made dinner for Serena. Spaghetti her favorite with meatballs that came out slightly burned, but she ate anyway because she was 7 and loved him and didn't care about culinary perfection. They talked about school, about her best friend Maya's new puppy, about the science fair project she wanted to do something involving volcanoes and baking soda that Marcus was already dreading to clean up. Normal things, good things, the small moments that made up a life. And when Serena was in bed holding the blue scarf again, Marcus allowed himself to feel something like gratitude. Whatever happened with Ella, he still had this. He still had her. And that was more than enough. But then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. I read your letter. His heart stopped. 3 dots appeared indicating she was typing. They disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. Then, can we meet tomorrow, 7 p.m., the coffee shop on State Street, please? Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, I'll be there. The coffee shop was called The Daily Grind, which Marcus had always thought was either a terrible name or a brilliant one, depending on your tolerance for puns. It occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone, all exposed brick and reclaimed wood, and the aggressive coziness that defined a certain kind of urban establishment. He arrived at 6:45 because showing up early was a habit he had never been able to break, and ordered a black coffee he didn't really want. Then he sat at a table in the corner and waited. Ella walked in at exactly 7. She looked different. Not in any obvious way, nothing he could point to and identify. But there was something in the way she carried herself, a looseness in her shoulders that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability in her expression that she wasn't quite managing to hide. She saw him, hesitated, then walked over and sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I got your letter. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the CEO tone he had grown used to. I didn't know what to say. I've started at least a dozen responses and deleted every one. Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. You didn't have to respond at all. Yes, I did. She looked at him, then really looked, and he saw the effort it cost her. You wrote things that no one has ever said to me, about seeing me, about what's underneath, about grief and fear, and the possibility of something more. Her voice caught slightly. I didn't know how to hear it. I've spent 34 years making sure no one got close enough to say things like that. So you ran. So I ran. She didn't flinch from the accusation, didn't try to defend herself. It's what I do, what I've always done. The moment anyone gets close enough to actually hurt me, I find a reason to push them away before they can leave first. Marcus thought about his own walls, the ones he had built around his grief, the ones he had convinced himself were protection when they were really just prisons. I understand that. I know you do. Her hand moved across the table, stopped halfway, retreated. Your letter said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You said that family isn't the people who never hurt each other. It's the people who stay even when they do. Marcus nodded. Denise used to say that, back when we were first married and still figuring out how not to kill each other. A ghost of a smile crossed Ella's face. Smart woman. She was. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. More like a held breath waiting for what came next. I found something last night. Ella reached into her bag and pulled out a small box worn at the edges, clearly old. She set it on the table between them. I haven't opened this in 34 years. It's everything I have left of my mother. Marcus looked at the box but didn't touch it. That seemed like a boundary she needed to cross herself. Ella lifted the lid with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, a thin metal bracelet. Cheap, the kind you could buy for a few dollars at any department store. A delicate chain with a small heart charm. She gave this to me for my 10th birthday, 3 months before she died. Ella picked up the bracelet, turning it over in her fingers. I hid it away because looking at it hurt too much, because wearing it meant admitting I still missed her, still needed her. She slipped it onto her wrist. The metal glinted in the coffee shop's dim lighting. I've been hiding for 34 years, building walls, keeping everyone out, telling myself that if I was strong enough, I would never have to feel that kind of pain again. Her eyes met his. But pain isn't something you can outrun. It just waits. And the longer you run, the more alone you are when it finally catches you. Marcus recognized the truth in her words, had lived that same truth for 3 years. Last night, Ella continued, I sat in my penthouse wearing this bracelet for the first time since my mother died, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief, the anger, the loneliness, the fear. Her voice dropped. And then I read your letter again. And I realized something. What? That I don't want to run anymore. The words hung in the air between them. I don't know how to do this, Marcus. I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to be part of a family, not since I was 10 years old. And I'm terrified that I'll hurt you, that I'll hurt Serena, that I'll do what I always do and push you away the moment it gets too real. She took a breath. But I'm more terrified of going back to my life the way it was, empty, controlled, safe in all the ways that don't actually matter. Marcus reached across the table. This time his hand covered hers. I don't need you to be perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. Denise sure as hell wasn't. She left her coffee cups everywhere and snored like a freight train. And once she forgot to pick Serena up from daycare because she got absorbed in a book. A small laugh escaped Ella. Really, really. The point is, love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you don't know what you're doing, even when you're certain you're going to mess it up. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm scared too. I haven't let myself feel anything real since Denise died. And the thought of opening myself up again, of risking that kind of loss again, he shook his head. But my daughter told me something without meaning to. She said that when you were around, I smiled more. And I realized that I've been so busy protecting myself from pain that I forgot what it felt like to be happy. Ella's eyes were bright with unshed tears. So what do? We take it slow. We figure it out together. And when one of us gets scared and wants to run, we tell the other person instead of just disappearing. A real smile, small but genuine, crossed her face. That sounds terrifyingly reasonable. I have my moments. They sat there, hands intertwined across a coffee shop table, two people who had spent years running from their own hearts, finally deciding to stand still. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was two broken people agreeing to try, which was maybe the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The weeks that followed were not easy. Ella didn't transform overnight into someone comfortable with vulnerability. There were moments when Marcus could see her retreating, pulling back as he and the familiar walls, old habits rising up like muscle memory. But she caught herself now, noticed what she was doing, and more importantly, she talked about it. I'm feeling like running again. She said it one evening, sitting in his car outside her building, and Marcus appreciated the honesty more than he could say. What's triggering it? She thought for a moment. Serena asked if I would come to her science fair next month. And my first instinct was to say no, to find an excuse. Because going to a science fair is something that families do, and the moment I started thinking of myself as part of your family, I panicked. Marcus nodded. Do you want to go? Yes. That's what scares me. I actually want to go. I want to see her volcano explode. I want to be there when she gets a ribbon, or doesn't get a ribbon, or whatever happens. I want to be part of it. So be part of it. Her laugh was slightly shaky. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's not as complicated as we make it either. You want to come to the science fair, you come to the science fair. That's it. No lifetime commitment required. No pressure to be perfect. Just show up. Ella was quiet for a moment. My father never showed up to anything. After my mother died, I don't think he attended a single school event, a single recital, a single parent-teacher conference. He was physically present sometimes, but never really there. That must have been lonely. I told myself I didn't need him, that I was strong enough to handle everything alone. But I think that's when I started building the walls. Because if I didn't need anyone, then no one could disappoint me. Marcus understood that logic, had lived a version of it himself. You know what I learned from Denise, he said. The strongest thing you can do isn't handling everything alone. It's letting someone help carry the weight. Ella turned to look at him, and in the streetlight, he could see the conflict in her eyes. The part of her that wanted to believe fighting the part that had been hurt too many times. What if I let you carry some of it, and then I drop everything anyway? Then we pick it up together and try again. And if I can't do it, if I'm too broken, Marcus reached over and took her hand, then we'll figure out a different way. But you don't get to decide you're too broken before you even try. That's not fair to either of us. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, okay, I'll come to the science fair. The smile that spread across Marcus's face felt foreign muscles he hadn't used in years, remembering their function. Serena's going to be thrilled. Don't get too excited. I'll probably say something awkward and scare all the other parents. That's fine. Most of the other parents are terrifying anyway. PT, moms are a special breed of intense. Ella laughed a real laugh, and the sound of it made something warm bloom in Marcus's chest. This was what hope felt like. Not a grand gesture or a perfect moment, but small steps forward. Brick by brick, they were building something new. Something neither of them had expected. Something that scared them both. But they were doing it anyway. And that Marcus was learning was what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Serena adapted faster than either adult expected. Children, Marcus realized, were more resilient than adults gave them credit for. They didn't carry the same weight of expectation, the same fear of disappointment. When Ella started appearing more regularly, first for drives, then for occasional dinners, then for Sunday afternoons at the park, Serena simply accepted it as the new normal. Miss Ella, why do you always wear your hair up? They were at Lincoln Park, Serena running ahead on the path while Marcus and Ella walked behind, close enough to watch but far enough to give her space. Ella touched her bun self-consciously. I don't know, I guess I've always done it that way. It looks more professional, but we're not at work. The observation was so simple and so obvious that Ella stopped walking. You're right, we're not. She reached up and pulled out the pins, letting her blonde hair fall around her shoulders. It changed her face, softened. It made her look younger and less guarded. There, Serena grinned. You look pretty. Thank you. Marcus watched the exchange with something that felt dangerously close to joy. These small moments were accumulating, creating a pattern, weaving something new from the threads of their separate lives. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still awkward silences and missteps and moments when old fears reared their heads. But there was also laughter and warmth and the slowly growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this could work. One evening after Serena had gone to bed, Marcus and Ella sat on his small balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. Can I tell you something? Ella's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Always. I used to think that success was the opposite of vulnerability. That if I built enough wealth, enough power, enough walls, I would be untouchable. Safe. She turned her mother's bracelet on her wrist. But the more I achieved, the emptier I felt. Like I was standing at the top of a mountain I had climbed alone, looking down at all the people I had passed on the way up and realizing I had no one to share the view with. Marcus waited, knowing she needed to find her own way to the point. Being here with you and Serena in this tiny apartment with the heating that rattles and the neighbors who play music too loud, I feel more at home than I have in my penthouse in 10 years. That heating is getting fixed next month, by the way. She laughed. I'm serious. I know you are. He reached over and took her hand. Home isn't about square footage or zip codes. It's about who's there when you walk through the door. Ella squeezed his fingers. I'm starting to understand that. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other in the rain and were slowly learning how to build something that could survive the storms. Below them, the city hummed its endless song, and somewhere in a small bedroom, a 7-year-old girl slept peacefully, clutching both a faded blue scarf and a picture book, with a colorful cover dreaming of volcanoes and science fairs, and a future that was finally starting to look like hope. The science fair was 3 weeks away when Richard Hoffman made his move. Marcus didn't know the CFO personally, had only seen him in passing, a gray-suited presence with calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. But Derek knew everyone, and Derek had been warning him for weeks. Hoffman's been asking questions. About you, about Carter, about how much time you two spend together. Let him ask. I'm serious, Marcus. The guy's been gunning for the CEO position for 15 years. If he thinks he can use your relationship with Ella to destabilize her, he will. Marcus had brushed off the concerns. He and Ella were careful, professional during work hours, discreet about their personal time. There was nothing for Hoffman to use, but he underestimated how little ammunition a determined enemy actually needed. The email arrived on a Monday morning, CC'd to the entire board of directors. Subject: concerns regarding CEO conduct. The body of the message was measured professional dripping with false concern. It raised questions about potential conflicts of interest, about inappropriate relationships between executives and subordinate employees, about judgment and propriety, and the image of the company. It never mentioned Marcus or Ella by name. It didn't need to. By noon, the rumors had spread through every floor of Sterling Corp. By end of business, HR had requested a formal meeting with Ella. By the next morning, Marcus found himself sitting across from two investigators in a windowless conference room answering questions about the exact nature of his relationship with the CEO. He told the truth, all of it. The night in the rain, the Philadelphia trip, the slow development of something more. He had nothing to hide and refused to act like he did. But the truth he was learning mattered less than the narrative. Ella called him that night, her voice tight with controlled fury. The board is demanding I address the allegations publicly. They want to know if I've been conducting a personal relationship with a company employee in a way that could be construed as preferential treatment or abuse of power. And what are you going to tell them? The truth. That we developed a personal relationship over time. That I've never given you any professional advantage you didn't earn. That my private life is my own business. Her voice wavered. But Marcus, I want you to understand something. If this goes badly, if the board decides to make an example of someone, it won't be me. I have contracts, lawyers 30% of voting shares. You have nothing. I know. I don't want you to lose your job because of me. Marcus let out a long breath. Do you remember what you said that night at the coffee shop about not wanting to run anymore? Of course I remember. This is what not running looks like. It looks like standing your ground when things get hard. It looks like facing the consequences of your choices instead of pretending they don't exist. I know that. He could hear the struggle in her voice, the old patterns fighting against the new. I just don't want you to get hurt. Marcus almost smiled. I spent 3 years being careful, protecting myself, making sure I never took any risks that might lead to pain. You know what I got for it? Pain anyway, plus loneliness, plus a daughter who thought happiness was something to feel guilty about. He paused, letting the words settle. I'd rather face whatever's coming with you than go back to being safe and empty. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Ella's voice stronger than before. I have a board meeting tomorrow at 9. I'm going to tell them everything. And then I'm going to remind them that I've delivered 400% returns over 10 years and that my personal life is not their concern. That sounds like a plan. It sounds like a fight. Marcus thought about his father, about the lessons that couldn't be taught with words, about what it meant to stand up for what mattered. Then let's fight. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Marcus waited in the parking garage. His shift technically started his attention anywhere but on the road. Derek had offered to cover for him, had practically forced him to stay close, and Marcus had been too anxious to argue. When Ella finally emerged from the elevator, her face was unreadable. Well, she walked toward him, her heels clicking on the concrete, and for a terrible moment, Marcus thought everything was about to fall apart. Then she smiled. They voted to censure Hoffman for bringing personal matters to the board without proper HR protocols. Apparently, 3 other executives had been waiting for a chance to take him down, and he handed them the ammunition himself. Marcus felt the tension drain from his shoulders. And you remain CEO, with a formal recommendation that I be more circumspect about my personal relationships in the future, which I accepted with appropriate humility. She stopped in front of him close enough that he could smell her perfume. They also asked if I intended to continue the relationship. I told them that was none of their business, but that if they required an answer, it was yes. Marcus couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. That must have been something to see. I think Margaret Chen actually applauded. Quietly but still. Ella, yes, I'm proud of you. She blinked, and for a moment he saw the walls waver. Saw the little girl who had never heard those words from anyone who mattered. I'm proud of myself. The admission came out surprised, like she hadn't expected it. I didn't run. I stood there in that room full of people who wanted to see me fail, and I told the truth. And it was terrifying, and it worked. Marcus reached out and took her hand. That's what courage looks like. She squeezed his fingers. I'm starting to understand that. They stood there in the parking garage, 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds, and the future stretched out before them, uncertain but no longer empty. The science fair was 2 weeks away. And for the first time in a very long time, both of them were looking forward to it. The gymnasium of Washington Elementary School smelled exactly the way all school gymnasiums smell, a peculiar mixture of floor polish, old sweat, and the industrial cleaner that never quite managed to cover either. Folding tables lined the walls, each one bearing a student's contribution to scientific inquiry, ranging from baking soda volcanoes to elaborate displays about the water cycle, to one ambitious fourth grader's attempt to explain quantum entanglement using string and cardboard. Serena's table was number 23, positioned between a project on plant growth and another on the conductivity of various fruits. Her volcano stood proud at the center, painted in careful browns and reds that she had spent 3 weekends perfecting. The poster board behind it featured her hypothesis, her methodology, and her conclusions, all written in the careful handwriting of someone who understood that presentation mattered. Marcus stood beside her wearing his best button-down shirt, the one Denise had bought him 6 years ago for a wedding they had attended together. It still fit, which was something. Serena wore her favorite dress, blue, with small white flowers, and her hair was pulled back with a ribbon that matched. And next to Marcus, her hand occasionally brushing against his when she thought no one was looking, stood Ella. She had arrived 10 minutes early, which Marcus had learned was practically late by her standards. She wore slacks and a simple blouse, her hair down around her shoulders the way Serena preferred, and on her wrist her mother's bracelet caught the fluorescent light every time she moved. The judges were making their rounds, clipboard-wielding teachers stopping at each table to ask questions and take notes. Serena bounced on her heels with barely contained excitement, rehearsing her explanation under her breath. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. Just tell them what you learned. Marcus's voice was calm, steadying. And speak loudly so they can hear you over the noise. Ella's addition made Serena giggle. You sound like you're coaching someone for a board presentation. I coach people for board presentations all the time. The principles are the same. Clear communication, confident delivery, and don't let them see you sweat. Marcus caught her eye and smiled. Something had shifted in Ella over the past weeks, something fundamental. She still had moments of retreat, still fought against 34 years of conditioning, but more and more often he saw her choosing to stay present instead of disappearing behind the walls. The judges reached table 22. Serena's bouncing intensified. Okay, here they come. What if I forget something? What if the volcano doesn't work? What if, hey, Marcus knelt down to her level. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. You worked hard on this. You learned things. That's what matters. Serena took a deep breath, then another. Okay, I can do this. The judges, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a younger man who looked like he might rather be anywhere else, arrived at table 23. The woman smiled warmly. And what do we have here? Serena launched into her explanation with all the enthusiasm of a 7-year-old who had practiced in front of her bathroom mirror for 2 weeks straight. She described the chemical reaction between baking soda and vinegar. She explained how real volcanoes work differently, but that this model demonstrated the basic principle of pressure and release. She pointed to her poster board, highlighting the key findings with a pointer she had fashioned from a chopstick and a star-shaped eraser. And now I'll demonstrate. She added the vinegar to the baking soda with the ceremonial gravity of a priest performing a sacred rite. The volcano erupted. Red-tinted foam poured down the sides, pooling on the plastic sheet Marcus had insisted on laying beneath the display. It wasn't the most impressive eruption in scientific history, but it worked, and Serena's face split into a grin that could have powered the Chicago electrical grid for a week. The judges made notes, asked a few follow-up questions, and moved on to table 24. Serena spun around to face Marcus and Ella, practically vibrating with relief. Did you see? It worked. It actually worked. We saw, baby girl. You did amazing. Marcus pulled her into a hug, feeling her small heart pounding against his chest. Over his daughter's head, he caught Ella's eye. She was watching them with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Something raw and unguarded, something that looked almost like longing. Ella. She blinked, the expression disappearing behind a quick smile. That was excellent, Serena. Very professional delivery. I particularly appreciated your explanation of the difference between the model and real volcanic activity. Serena beamed. Thanks, Miss Ella. Are you going to stay for the awards? A flicker of something crossed Ella's face, the old instinct to retreat, to find an excuse to protect herself from caring too much. But then she looked at Marcus and at Serena and at the gymnasium full of families celebrating their children's accomplishments, and she made a choice. I wouldn't miss it. The awards ceremony took place an hour later after all the judges had completed their rounds and retreated to a corner to deliberate. Parents milled around making small talk, comparing projects, doing that particular dance of competitive politeness that school events seemed to generate. Marcus found himself talking to other fathers, something he rarely did. A conversation about the Bears season led to a discussion about local traffic patterns, which somehow evolved into a debate about the best pizza places on the north side. Normal things, dad things, the kind of social interactions he had been avoiding for 3 years because they required energy he didn't have. But tonight, standing in that gymnasium with Ella at his side and Serena running around with her classmates, Marcus felt different, lighter, like a weight he had been carrying for so long he forgot it existed had finally been set down. The principal took the microphone, calling everyone to attention. Parents found their seats, children clustered near the front, and the awards began. Third place went to the Quantum Entanglement Project, which Marcus thought was either generous or showed a lack of understanding of quantum physics on the judge's part. Second place went to an impressive display on butterfly migration patterns, complete with hand-drawn maps and actual preserved specimens. And first place in the second grade division goes to... The principal paused for dramatic effect, the way all principals did, stretching the moment until the tension became almost unbearable. Serena Thompson for her outstanding volcano project and excellent presentation skills. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Serena stood frozen for a moment, disbelief written across her face before her friends started pushing her toward the front. She walked up on legs that didn't quite seem to belong to her, accepted the blue ribbon with trembling hands, and turned to find Marcus in the crowd. He was already on his feet, clapping so hard his palms stung, tears streaming down his face in a way that would have embarrassed him 6 months ago, but now felt exactly right. Beside him, Ella was clapping too, her own eyes suspiciously bright. She did it. Her voice was thick with emotion. She actually did it. After the ceremony, they walked to the car through the cool October evening, Serena skipping ahead with her blue ribbon pinned to her dress and her volcano carefully balanced in her arm. The parking lot was full of other families doing the same, calling out congratulations to each other, loading projects into minivans, capturing the moment in phone photos that would be treasured for decades. Marcus opened the trunk and helped Serena secure her volcano for the trip home. She was chattering a mile a minute, replaying every detail of the evening, analyzing the judges' expressions, speculating about what had made her project stand out. And when I showed them the lava, did you see their faces? The lady judge looked so impressed, and the man judge was writing stuff down really fast, which I think means he liked it, right? And then she stopped mid-sentence, turning to look at Ella. Miss Ella. Yes, are you coming home with us? The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Not are you coming to dinner or are you staying for a while, but are you coming home? As if home was a place that already included her. Ella looked at Marcus. He gave a slight nod, leaving the decision in her hands. If that's okay with you. Serena's face lit up. Can we have ice cream? To celebrate. Oh, it's a school night. Marcus's objection was automatic parental reflex kicking in before his brain caught up. But you won first place. That seems like it deserves an exception. Ella's support surprised him, and from Serena's reaction surprised her too. Please, Daddy. Miss Ella says it's okay. Miss Ella doesn't have to deal with you being cranky tomorrow morning from a sugar crash. But his resistance was weakening, and all three of them knew it. Fine. One scoop. Small. Serena cheered. Ella smiled. And Marcus, standing in a school parking lot on an ordinary October evening, felt something click into place. This was what it felt like. A family. Not the one he had planned, not the one he had lost, but something new. Something built from the wreckage of grief and the fragile scaffolding of hope. They drove to the ice cream shop that Serena loved, the one with the chalkboard menu and the mismatched chairs, and the owner who remembered every regular customer's favorite flavor. Serena got strawberry with sprinkles. Marcus got chocolate. Ella, after studying the menu with the intensity she usually reserved for quarterly reports, got pistachio. They sat at a table by the window watching the city pass by, talking about everything and nothing. Serena described her plans for next year's science fair, something involving magnets that sounded potentially dangerous. Ella offered suggestions that were either brilliant or insane. Marcus couldn't quite tell which. He listened to them debate the merits of various experimental approaches and felt his heart expand in his chest until he thought it might burst. This, this was what Denise had wanted for them. Not endless grief, not a life lived in the shadow of loss, but this joy connection, the messy, beautiful business of building something together. He thought about the cemetery, about standing at her grave and asking permission to move forward, and he knew with a certainty that settled into his bones that she would have approved. Serena's energy began to flag around 9 o'clock, the sugar high giving way to the inevitable crash. Marcus carried her to the car, her head lolling against his shoulder, the blue ribbon still pinned proudly to her dress. Ella walked beside them close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. "She's amazing." Ella's voice was soft-pitched not to wake the sleeping child. "She is. You did that. You raised her to be curious and kind and brave." Marcus shook his head. "Denise did most of the hard work. The early years, the foundation. I'm just trying not to mess it up. You're doing more than that." They reached the car. Marcus settled Serena into the back seat, buckling her in carefully, making sure the blue ribbon wasn't crushed. She murmured something in her sleep, a fragment of a dream, and clutched her volcano trophy tighter. Ella watched from outside the car, her expression unreadable in the parking lot lights. "Marcus?" "Yeah." She hesitated, visibly wrestling with something. "I need to tell you something. About the board meeting. About what actually happened." Marcus straightened up, closing Serena's door gently. "I thought you said it went well." "It did. But there's something I didn't mention." Ella took a breath. "When they asked about my intentions for the relationship, I told them yes, I intended to continue it. But that wasn't all I said. What else? I told them that I had found something I had been looking for my entire life without knowing I was looking for it. I told them that for the first time since I was 10 years old, I felt like I belonged somewhere. And I told them that if they had a problem with that, they could find themselves a new CEO. Marcus stared at her. "You said that to the board of directors, word for word." She met his eyes, defiant and vulnerable, all at once. "They voted unanimously to drop the matter. Apparently threatening to leave is very effective when you're the only reason the company is profitable." Marcus didn't know whether to laugh or, "Krita, you risked your career for this. For us. I risked nothing. Because a career without a life isn't worth having. I spent 10 years learning that lesson the hard way. I'm not going back." She stepped closer. "I love you, Marcus. I don't know how to do it well yet. I don't know if I'll ever get it completely right. But I love you and I love Serena, and I'm not running anymore." The words hit him like a wave, carrying away the last remnants of doubt and fear. "I love you too." 3 words, the simplest in any language, the hardest to say. But standing in that parking lot with his daughter sleeping in the car behind him and the woman he loved standing before him, Marcus found they were also the truest. 3 months later. Lincoln Park in November wore a different face than Lincoln Park in summer. The trees had surrendered their leaves, standing bare against a gray sky that threatened rain without committing to it. The grass was brown, the paths were wet, and the only people brave enough to face the chill were joggers with something to prove and families with children who didn't care about weather. Marcus, Serena, and Ella were among the latter. They had come to fly the kite that Ella had bought the week before, a bright red diamond with a streaming tail that Serena had spotted in a store window and fallen immediately in love with. Ella had purchased it without hesitation, an act that still surprised Marcus every time it happened. The woman who ran a $2 billion corporation was learning to be spontaneous, and the results were sometimes hilarious. "You have to run faster." Serena's instructions were delivered with all the authority of a 7-year-old expert. "I'm running as fast as I can." Ella was not in fact running particularly fast, but she was trying her breath coming in clouds, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. The kite wobbled, Rose wobbled again, and crashed into the grass for the 4th time. "I'm hopeless at this." Ella walked back to the bench where Marcus sat watching, dropping down beside him with a theatrical sigh. She learned from her mom. Denise was a kite champion, won a contest when she was 12. Never let me forget it. Serena ran over kite, dragging behind her. "Daddy, you try. In a minute, baby. Let Miss Ella catch breath." Serena plopped down on the bench between them, kite forgotten for the moment. "When I grow up, I want to run a company like Miss Ella, but also fly kites. Can you do both? I think you can do anything you set your mind to." Ella's voice was warm, certain. The key is figuring out what matters and making time for it. I spent too many years thinking work was the only thing that mattered. I was wrong. Serena considered this. What matters to you now, Ella didn't hesitate. You, your dad, being here, being part of something. The simple honesty of the answer made Marcus's chest ache. Serena nodded satisfied. Good, because you're part of our family now, which means you have to learn to fly kites. It's a rule. Is it uh-huh? Daddy made it up just now. Marcus held up his hands in mock innocence. I don't recall making any such rule. You did. In your head. I could tell. Ella laughed that real laugh that Marcus had learned to treasure. Well, if it's a rule, I suppose I have no choice. She stood up, brushing grass from her pants. Come on then, teacher. Show me again. Serena grabbed her hand, pulling her back toward the open field with all the impatience of childhood. Ella let herself be dragged, looking back over her shoulder at Marcus with an expression that said, help me, and I love this in equal measure. Marcus watched them go, his daughter and the woman he loved running across the brown grass with a red kite streaming behind them. The wind caught it just right, lifting it into the air, and for a moment it flew, really flew, climbing toward the gray sky like a prayer made visible. Serena's cheer carried across the field. You did it, Miss Ella, you did it. And Ella, CEO of a $2 billion corporation, builder of walls, keeper of secrets, looked up at the flying kite with an expression of pure joy. I did it. 3 words. So simple, so profound. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them here. The rainy night, the cemetery, the letters and the fear, and the slow, painful work of learning to trust again. None of it had been easy. None of it had gone according to plan. But here they were, 3 people who had found each other against all odds, building something new from the pieces of what they had lost. The first drops of rain began to fall. We should go. Marcus stood calling out to them. Serena's face fell. But we just got it flying. We'll come back. The kite will still be here. Promise, I promise. Ella and Serena ran back, the kite collapsing behind them, and they huddled together under the umbrella Marcus had thought to bring. 3 people pressed close, sharing warmth. I used to hate rain. Ella's voice was quiet. It reminds me of that night, walking alone, feeling like everything was over. And now I think rain is just the world's way of telling you to find shelter. And sometimes the shelter you find becomes home. Marcus pulled her closer. That's surprisingly poetic for a CEO. I have hidden depths. Serena wedged herself between them. Can we get hot chocolate? It's almost dinner time. Please, Miss Ella likes hot chocolate. She told me. Ella's eyebrow rose. I don't recall saying that. You said you liked warm things on cold days. Hot chocolate is warm, so you must like it. The logic was impeccable. Marcus sighed. 1 hot chocolate. Small. You always say small and then you order large anyway. That's between me and the barista. They walked toward their car, Serena in the middle, holding both their hands, the rain falling gently around them. Just another family on another autumn afternoon, unremarkable to anyone who passed by. But Marcus knew the truth. Knew how many walls had to fall, how many fears had to be faced, how many steps had to be taken for them to get here. Holding on to grief is like holding your breath. Eventually you have to exhale or you'll suffocate. Denise had said that once back when her grandmother died, and Marcus didn't know how to comfort her. He hadn't understood it then. He understood it now. You couldn't live in the past. You could honor it, learn from it, carry its lessons forward. But you couldn't live there. The dead didn't want that. The living couldn't survive it. He thought about Denise, wondered what she would think of Ella, of this new configuration of their family, wondered if she was watching wherever she was and if she approved. The answer came not in words but in feeling, in the warmth of Serena's hand in his, in the smile Ella gave him over their daughter's head, in the simple, ordinary miracle of walking through the rain with people you loved. This was what Denise had wanted for him. Not endless mourning, not a shrine built from grief, but this life messy and complicated and beautiful. Love didn't divide, it expanded. Family wasn't just the people who shared your blood, it was the people who stayed. Home wasn't a place. It was the people who made you feel like you belonged. They reached the car. Marcus opened the doors, helped Serena in, caught Ella's eye over the roof. Thank you, she looked confused. For what? For stopping that night. For staying when it got hard. for being here now." Ella smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. "Thank you for coming back. When you could have driven away. When it would have been easier. I almost did. But you didn't. No, I didn't." She walked around the car close enough to touch, but not touching. Not with Serena watching through the window. Why Marcus thought about his father. About the lessons that couldn't be taught with words. About what it meant to be the kind of man who stopped when someone needed help. Because my father taught me that a real man doesn't walk past someone who needs help. Because I thought about what I would want if Serena was ever alone and scared. Because sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing. Ella was quiet for a moment. My father never stopped for anyone. He was too busy, too important, too afraid of what it might cost him. I'm sorry. Don't be. His example taught me, too, what not to be, what not to become. She opened her door. I spent 34 years building walls because I thought they would protect me. Turns out they were a prison, and you were the first person who made me want to break out. They got in the car. Serena was singing something under her breath, a song from a movie she had watched too many times. The radio came on, playing soft jazz that filled the silence. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the coffee shop that had become their place. Behind them, Lincoln Park receded in the rearview mirror, the rain still falling, the bare trees standing sentinel over the paths where they had walked. Ahead, the city waited, full of ordinary moments that were anything but ordinary when shared with the right people. 6 months later, the boardroom at Sterling Corp was full of people pretending to pay attention to quarterly projections while actually checking their phones under the table. The usual assortment of executives, middle managers, and department heads gathered for the usual ritual of charts and graphs and carefully optimistic forecasts. Ella stood at the front, delivering the presentation with her characteristic precision. But something was different today. Something in her voice and her bearing that made people sit up straighter and actually listen. "Before we conclude, I have an announcement." The room went quiet. Announcements from Ella Carter were never trivial. As many of you know, Sterling Corp has always prided itself on treating employees as family. But I've come to realize that we can do better. Much better. She clicked to a new slide. "I'm pleased to announce the creation of the Thompson Family Initiative, named in honor of someone who taught me that flexibility and family are not obstacles to success but essential components of it." The slide showed details: subsidized childcare, flexible work arrangements, support for employees dealing with family crises, resources for single parents juggling work and home responsibilities. This initiative will be funded by a personal donation of $5 million supplemented by company matching funds. Our goal is to help 47 families in the first year with expansion based on demand and results. The room erupted in murmurs. This was unprecedented. This was not how Ella Carter operated, or rather, not how she used to operate. I know this is unexpected. I know some of you are wondering what changed. Ella's eyes found Marcus sitting in the back of the room where he had been invited as a special guest. "What changed is that I learned something. Something it took me 44 years to understand." She took a breath. "Strength isn't building walls so high that no one can get in. Strength is having the courage to let people see who you really are, to need them, to let them need you, to build something together instead of standing alone on top of what you've achieved." The room was completely silent now. I spent 34 years protecting myself from the kind of loss I experienced as a child. And in doing so, I cut myself off from the kind of love that makes loss worth risking. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "This initiative isn't about charity. It's about recognition. Recognition that the people who work here have lives outside these walls, that their families matter, that sometimes the best investment a company can make is in the well-being of its people." Applause started somewhere in the middle of the room, spreading until the entire boardroom was on its feet. Ella stood at the front, accepting the ovation with a grace that Marcus knew had been hard-won. Behind her mask of composure, he could see the woman who had walked alone in the rain, the girl who had lost her mother at 10, the person who had spent decades building walls that were finally coming down. After the meeting, Marcus found her in her office, standing by the window that overlooked the city. "That was quite a speech. Was it too much?" She turned to face him. "Be honest." "It was perfect. I've never talked about my past at work. Never let anyone see behind the curtain. And now the entire executive team knows about my childhood, my walls, my everything. Are you regretting it?" She thought for a moment. No, that's what surprises me. I thought I would feel exposed, vulnerable, but I feel lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot what it felt like to put it down. Marcus crossed the room, taking her hands in his. That's what happens when you stop pretending. The weight you've been carrying, the walls you've been maintaining, they take energy. Energy you can use for other things when you finally let them go. Ella looked down at their intertwined fingers. The board approved everything. The funding, the timeline, the scope. Not one dissenting vote. They believe in you. They believe in the numbers. The projections show that supporting employees leads to better retention, higher productivity, reduced training costs. Maybe. But they also believe in you, in the vision you laid out, in the person you've become. Ella's smile was small but real. The person I've become. I'm still figuring out who that is. That's okay. We all are. He pulled her closer. You know what Denise would say if she could see this? What she would say, it took you long enough. Then she would probably try to take credit for the whole thing because she was absolutely insufferable about being right. Ella laughed. I wish I could have met her. Me too. She would have liked you. Eventually, after she finished interrogating you about your intentions, the thought made Ella's eyes go soft. I never had someone to interrogate my boyfriends. My father certainly didn't care enough. I had to be my own protector. Well, now you have Serena, and she's very protective. I've seen the way she watches when you're stressed. She's appointed herself your guardian. She has. Last week, she told me very seriously that I needed to make sure Miss Ella got enough sleep. Apparently, you have dark circles under your eyes sometimes, and this concerns her greatly. Ella's hand flew to her face. I do. You're fine, you're beautiful. But a 7-year-old has decided you're part of the pack, and the pack takes care of its own. Something in Ella's expression shifted. Part of the pack. Family isn't just the people who look like you. It's the people who love you. The words hung in the air, the echo of what Serena had said so many months ago, the truth that had been waiting all along for them to understand it. Family was a choice. Love was a choice. Every day in 1,000 small ways you chose to show up for the people who mattered. And when you chose them and they chose you back, that was the miracle. Not the grand gestures, not the sweeping declarations, but the ordinary moments, the daily decisions, the accumulated weight of presence and attention and care. Marcus had learned that from Denise, had forgotten it in the years of grief, was learning it again every day with Ella and Serena. I should get back to work. Ella's voice was reluctant. There's a mountain of paperwork waiting for the initiative launch, and I have a shift starting in 20 minutes. They separated the practical demands of their lives, reasserting themselves. But at the door, Marcus turned back. Dinner tonight, Serena's been asking about lasagna. Your lasagna. Don't sound so skeptical. I've been practicing. Should I bring wine and antacid? He grinned. Trust the process. Famous last words. But she was smiling and he was smiling, and somewhere in the city, a 7-year-old girl was counting down the hours until school ended and her family would be together again. That night, in the small apartment that had never felt smaller or warmer, they gathered around a table that barely fit 3 chairs. The lasagna was edible, which Marcus counted as a victory. Serena talked about her day, the endless stream of consciousness that children produced when they felt safe enough to share. There was drama involving a missing eraser. There was triumph involving a spelling test. There was philosophical inquiry about why the sky was blue and whether other planets had skies and if aliens had science fairs. Ella answered the questions with surprising patience, drawing on half-remembered physics classes and pure improvisation. Marcus watched them interact, his daughter and this woman who had somehow become essential to both their lives. Later, after Serena was in bed with her blue scarf and her new favorite book, Marcus and Ella sat on the small balcony wrapped in blankets against the November chill. I got the job offer today, the R&D position. Director of Electric Vehicle Systems. The job that would use his engineering background, that would pay 3 times his current salary, that would mean never driving another executive anywhere ever again. And I took it. Ella's face broke into a smile. Marcus, that's wonderful. It means I'll actually be using my brain again. Designing things, solving problems, not just sitting behind a wheel waiting. You were always using your brain. You just didn't have anywhere to apply it. She reached for his hand. I'm proud of you. The words hit differently when they came from her, because she understood what they meant. Understood the journey from rock bottom to here. It's because of you, you know. If you hadn't pushed me, if you hadn't told Sarah to put my resume on the short list, I didn't tell her anything except that we had a candidate with relevant experience who deserved consideration. You got the job on your own merits. Still, he squeezed her fingers. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for stopping that night. When you could have driven away, when it would have been easier. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker below. Two people who had found each other in the rain. Two people who had chosen against all odds to build something new. There would be more challenges ahead. More walls to tear down, more fears to face. That was the nature of life, of love, of being human. But there would also be more moments like this. Quiet evenings on a tiny balcony. Lasagna dinners with a 7-year-old who asked too many questions. Science fairs and kite flying and all the ordinary miracles that made up a life. Marcus thought about the scarf in Serena's room, the bracelet on Ella's wrist, the memories they carried, the people they honored, the past that had shaped them. Some things you held on to, some things you let go. The wisdom was knowing which was which. Denise would always be part of him, her love, her lessons, her legacy. But loving her memory didn't mean he couldn't love someone else. Holding on to what she had given him didn't mean he couldn't reach for something new. Love expanded, it didn't divide. That was the truth she had taught him, and he was finally starting to understand it. In the spring, they bought a house. Nothing fancy, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who actually talked to each other. It had a small yard where Serena could play a garage, where Marcus could tinker with engines, and a kitchen with enough counter space for Ella to learn to cook without setting off the smoke detector. The day they moved in, Serena ran from room to room, claiming every space as her own. This would be her reading corner. This would be where she built blanket forts. This would be where the Christmas tree went, even though Christmas was 9 months away. Marcus and Ella stood in the empty living room, surrounded by boxes, and looked at each other. We did it. We did. A house together, like real adults. Ella laughed. I've run a $2 billion company. Somehow this feels scarier, because this matters more. She didn't argue, because this was true. They unpacked boxes and arranged furniture and discovered that they had wildly different opinions about where the couch should go. They compromised, then compromised again, then gave up and let Serena decide which turned out to be the wisest strategy all along. That night in their new home with their daughter asleep in her new room, Marcus and Ella sat on the back porch and watched the stars. I never thought I'd have this. Ella's voice was quiet. Any of it. A family. A home that feels like home. Someone who knows the worst parts of me and stays anyway. I know the worst parts of you. Marcus feigned offense. You haven't told me any worst parts. Just moderately concerning parts. She nudged him with her shoulder. I'm serious. So am I. What are these worst parts? I want to judge them for myself. She was quiet for a moment. When I was 26, I stepped over a homeless man on my way into a building without even seeing him. I was so focused on where I was going that I literally didn't register another human being in my path. That's not your worst part. That's just being human, but I remember it. All these years later, because it showed me who I was becoming. Someone who didn't see people, who walked past anything that wasn't directly relevant to my goals. And now I see people. Because of you, because of Serena, because you reminded me that everyone is someone's daughter, someone's father, someone's whole world. Marcus pulled her closer. You were never as cold as you pretended to be. The walls were thick, but they weren't all the way through. How do you know? Because you stopped that night, in the rain. You could have told me to go away, could have made one phone call and had me fired. Instead, you got in the car. You let a stranger see you at your worst. That's not what someone without a heart does. Maybe I was just too tired to fight. Maybe. Or maybe some part of you was ready, waiting for permission to come out. Ella considered this. Do you really believe that the person I'm becoming was always there, just hidden? I believe we're all more than the walls we build. I believe fear makes us smaller than we have to be. And I believe that with the right people, we can become who we were always meant to be. She turned to look at him. When did you get so wise? 3 years of therapy and a 7-year-old who asks questions I can't dodge. Ella laughed, and the sound of it filled the night. Fair enough. They sat together until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold. Two people who had found each other in the darkness. Two people who had chosen to walk into the light. Inside the house, Serena slept peacefully, dreaming of volcanoes and kites and all the adventures yet to come. And on her nightstand, beside the colorful book in the blue ribbon, sat two things: a faded blue scarf that smelled faintly of lavender and a cheap metal bracelet with a small heart charm. The old and the new. The past and the present. The memories that made them who they were and the future they were building together. Family wasn't just the people who shared your blood. It was the people who stayed.